Hi, my name's Janelle and welcome back to Rosary Apparel. In this video, I'm so excited to be sharing all about my cross stitch a day project. My husband Matt and I went over to Japan for 6 months this year, and as a way to document and remember our trip, I decided to make a cross stitch a day travel diary. Here it is in all its finished framed glory. I honestly don't think I've ever been more in love with something I've made. I am so proud of this incredible keepsake that we have of our trip. And today I'm just going to go through all the ins and outs on how I did it, the inspiration behind it, as well as answering a whole heap of your questions. So if you're wanting to do a travel diary just like this for your own adventures, then keep watching this video as I'm going to go through the whole process step by step. I'm actually going to pop this down now so I don't accidentally break it because it's so precious to me. But yeah, I could literally look at it all day. I'm so in love with it. Okay, I've just popped it down on the ground next to me, so I might look down here to refer to it from time to time, just in case you're wondering what I'm looking at. So basically, as a bit of an intro to this whole entire project, I thought I would start by sharing the inspiration behind it. Like I said, Matt and I were traveling around Japan for 6 months, and I wanted to document it in a way that was a little bit meaningful and in a way that I could potentially have a bit of a keepsake of our trip. So ultimately what inspired me to do a cross stitch a day project was a image I found on Pinterest. It's basically a book cover that has a whole heap of little micro cross stitches all over it. It's actually by a cross stitch artist called Makoto Uzu, who I actually got to meet while I was in Tokyo. And actually this little red cap represents Makoto. So yeah, basically this image really inspired the whole project. I was also really inspired by Lindsay Stitch's Embroidery a Day project that she completed in 2020, and it's the most incredible piece of art I've ever seen. So the two of those things together kind of inspired this whole project of mine. I think the way I'm going to structure this video is first I'm going to answer some of your questions. I asked for questions over on my Instagram the other day and I got so many good ones, which hopefully by answering them will give you a better idea how to complete a project like this for yourself. I won't be going into exactly how to cross stitch in this video because I have actually shared a video a long time ago about how to cross stitch. It's actually one of the first videos I ever made, so I'm not sure if it's very good quality, but it does cover all the basics of cross stitch. So if you're new to the craft, definitely go and have a watch of that. And then after I've finished all of your questions, I will go through some of the different stories behind each of the images. I don't think I'll go through every single image just because there is almost 200. But yeah, I'll just pick a few to go through and also go through the ones that were most asked about over on Instagram, which will hopefully give you a good idea about how to pick what to represent each day if you are to do a project like this for yourself. So let's start with this one. Karina Beamer asked, how could I start a project like this? What supplies do you need on hand? So there are 4 things you'll need to start a project like this. The first one is Aida cloth. I used a 14 count Aida cloth for my project, which basically means there are 14 squares or 14 holes per inch of fabric. I think it's the most common for cross stitching projects. I obviously didn't know how big my finished cross stitch was going to be, so I ended up getting about 3/4 of a meter or 3/4 of a yard of Aida cloth, which ended up being a lot. My finished project ended up being under half a meter in width, so I could have definitely gotten away with just half a meter. It is pretty pricey, so you just keep that in mind. Usually I think it's around $60 to $70 a meter. You are also going to need some embroidery thread. I just so happen to have a whole heap of embroidery threads in my garage that I had given to me by a friend, and I decided to just pack a whole range of different colors and bring them over to Japan with me. Here is a look at the different colors I brought over. Basically every kind of color you could think of. And yeah, not once did I really feel like I didn't have the right color I was looking for, because I managed to take quite a bit over. You're also going to need an embroidery hoop. I started off with this wooden one here, which is 18 centimeters in diameter. And then I also picked up this plastic one while I was in Japan, which I don't know how big it is, but looking at it, it looks like it might be like 15 centimeters or so. I actually preferred this one. I like the size of it a lot better. And lastly, you will also need an embroidery needle. The next question is from Traveling Ghost. Did you design the icons yourself or use an app? Because they're all amazing. Thank you so much. I would say I designed about 90% of the images myself, and then the other 10% I found on Pinterest. I was actually able to find quite a few of Makoto Uzu's designs on Pinterest. So yeah, majority of the ones that I didn't design are by him. But yeah, I am proud to say that at least 90% I designed myself, because it is such a personal project that is based off your own experiences. It is best to design them yourself, because then you can make whatever random thing you want. And in order to design my little micro cross stitches, I used a website called Stitch Fiddle. Basically on Stitch Fiddle, you can just design any type of pixelated craft, so whether it's crochet, cross stitch, other type of needleworks, I'm assuming. I can't remember, I've only ever used it for cross stitch. But on Stitch Fiddle you can actually select what thread type you're using, and it has the whole entire library of different shades and different colors that that thread is available in. So you can really like narrow it down to the exact shade you want to make your cross stitch out of. I wasn't so fussed about that. I just picked colors that I liked, and most of the time I was able to find a similar color in the collection I brought over with me. I figured it probably would be best if I just like show you how to go about using Stitch Fiddle and how to design a little image. In order to keep my images all a consistent size, I used an like art board that was 20 stitches by 20 stitches, and I wasn't able to design anything bigger than that, and that's why all of my images are kind of a similar size. For this example, I'm going to make, there was this day in Fukuoka where I went to the most magical trim shop. So it had a whole heap of like lace trims, ribbons, any kind of crafty trim you can think of. This store had it. And unfortunately that day, something else happened that I ended up making the pixel art for. So for this example, I'm just going to make a cute little trim reel, and hopefully that will give you a bit of an idea on how I designed these micro cross stitch images. And basically I would go to stitchfiddle.com, and then as you can see here, you can choose your craft, and I would obviously choose cross stitch. Then I would select DMC because DMC is the thread I mostly had. And then I selected empty chart own design. So now you can actually select how big your grid size is going to be. And like I said, I would change mine to be 20 by 20 stitches, which is like the perfect size for a little micro cross stitch. Okay, so as you can see, now I have a grid here of 20 by 20 stitches. And then if you just go to this like color section on the left-hand side, you can add whatever color you want to make your design out of. So like I said, I'm gonna make a cute little trim reel just for this example. So I'm gonna start with like a light brown color to represent the cardboard reel that the trims were packaged on. This one here will do. I would just start tapping away. Basically, I want to make a kind of circular shape. Don't expect to probably get it perfect straight away. It's just a matter of playing around until the shape is right. There's a little dot there to represent the spool. Then I'm gonna go with pink because it's one of my favorite colors. This will be the trim, and I'm just gonna place it all around the reel or spool, whatever you call it. And then I'm gonna have a little bit hanging off as well, because that is what a spool of trim does. And then to make it a bit more interesting, I'm gonna grab a darker pink and I'll just make a like stripe design. And I guess just to make it look a little bit less uniform, I'll also just have a little bit of a diagonal at the end just so it looks like it's been cut. And then, yeah, that is my spool of trim. Obviously, not every single day was as simple as that, but that gives you a bit of an idea of how I like designed each of my little micro cross stitches. And then I would place it into a folder in my Photos app called Cross Stitch. And as you can see here are all of the designs I created using Stitch Fiddle. I wouldn't say it's the easiest thing ever, like some designs took me a lot longer to create than others, but once you get into the swing of it, it does become easier. And my pixel art definitely improved as I did this project. Binny Brickley asked, did you have a limited color palette? It looks so cohesive. No, I didn't actually have an idea of a color palette in mind. Obviously, I have my favorite colors, so I tended to use those where I could. Peachy, pink, and burnt orange are probably the most common colors that I use throughout the project, and that's just because they're my favorite colors and I'm drawn to them. But apart from that, no, I just went with whatever color suited the image. The only color that I used consistently throughout the project to kind of tie in all the images was a really dark brown. It's actually the brown that you can see that the words underneath the whole project are written from. It looks black, but it is a dark brown, and it actually looks a lot less harsh than black as well. Wherever a black or darker shade was needed, I used this same brown, and I think it worked really well to tie all the different images together and did help to make it all feel really cohesive. Next, Little's Knitting Hands asked, did you know the layout of all the little pieces beforehand, or did you go with the flow? This was by far the most challenging part of this project for me personally. Obviously, because I didn't know what the next day would bring, I didn't know how the different pieces were going to look next to one another. I wasn't stitching every single day. It wasn't like I have to stitch this thing that happened today on the day it happened. I just kept the images saved on my phone until I had a pocket of time to be able to work on the cross stitch. So yeah, I did sometimes have like 5 or so images stored up at one given time, and so when I sat down to stitch them, I had 5 to kind of work out how to lay them out. As a general rule, I did work consistently from left to right in the order of the days, so they all kind of like make sense to one another. Like all the times we're in Tokyo is all kind of clumped together, and then when we're in Fukuoka it's all clumped together, and when we're in Beppu it's all nicely together. So, but yeah, it was such a challenge to get the layout looking nice. I didn't want it to be completely uniform like a grid. I did want it to be flexible. For example, up the top here, I have a whole heap grouped so closely together. I did not understand the idea or concept of the layout at all, and how if it's too squished together, it's just not easy to actually look at the individual items. And then there are some that are just so nicely spaced that I'm really happy with. Like this section here is really nice, and this like tennis racket here that kind of fits nicely in between all these pieces around it. Some worked out great, but other times the spacing isn't perfect, and I wish I could just click and like move some items slightly to the left a little more just so it looked more central. But there's nothing you can really do about that, and ultimately it's not meant to look 100% perfect. It's meant to look a little bit more free-flowing and like the project that it is. It's like stitching a thing every single day. It doesn't have to be perfectly spaced, but the perfectionist in me did try to make the layout as nicely spaced as possible. Okay, next question. Shari's Stitcher asked, wondering what the large letters at the bottom say, will you please translate? Yeah, I definitely wanted to put some Japanese writing down the bottom of this project just to represent the whole experience, and I did actually learn how to read and speak a bit of Japanese before our trip as well, so I wanted to make the most of the language that I'd learnt. So the writing actually says Nihon Mainichi, which means Japan every day. I've used a combination of kanji and hiragana. I'm not very good at reading kanji, so I decided to add hiragana in there to spell out the Mainichi part, because I can actually read hiragana, so it makes more sense to me than the kanji for the word every day. Next, Mrs. Joy Mac asked, I have so many questions. How long on average did each design take to stitch? I would say that each design took about half an hour to an hour to stitch, and maybe a good 15 minutes or so to actually design the pixel art, depending on the image. Some were only like 2 minutes, but I reckon most of them were around 10-15 minutes to design. Next, Prinsy PL asked, was it tricky to come up with a distinct image for every day? Yes and no. Matt and I at the end of each day would come up with an image to represent the day, and usually each day had a moment where we would be like, yes, this is the cross stitch for today. But oftentimes some days had multiple moments that it was really hard to narrow down just to one, and other days were really mundane and we would just wake up, work all day and then go to sleep. So yeah, there were definitely days where it was tricky to come up with a design even. But yeah, on those days we just had to be really creative and almost like mindful about what could represent the day. So for example, I have a little group of bubbles on the cross stitch, which was basically from one of those very mundane days, and we had just been working all day. And then I went out into the balcony of our apartment to hang some washing up to dry, and I just saw all these bubbles up in the air. And then when I looked down over the edge of the balcony, there were just a whole group of kids playing on the street with this bubble machine. And it was just the most pure magical thing ever. And just, yeah, on a summer's day to have a whole heap of bubbles in the air, it was just magical. So that ended up being the image for that day. Yeah, nothing exciting happened to us, but it was still just a really great moment in Japan. And yeah, I guess that's an example of when nothing happens, there is still something in every day that can make you smile or bring you a little bit of joy. Question 8. Sinna Sews asked, were there any days where you didn't feel like cross-stitching something? What did you do then? Yes, there were. Like, I think it was maybe 3 days into our trip, like 3 days since we landed in Japan, Matt came down with COVID and I caught it 2 days later. It was such a rough start to our trip. I cannot even begin to explain how isolating it was to be alone in a country and have to fend for yourselves, look after ourselves, and be super sick as well. Like, oh, it was bleak. We were also in a hotel room at the time because our long-term apartment wasn't quite ready for us yet. So the first 3 weeks of our trip we spent in a really cheap, slightly decrepit hotel, and we got sick. So we had to spend a good week and a bit inside this hotel room until we got better. And like I said, we were really sick, so I obviously was not up to even thinking about this cross-stitch project. I was only 3 days in, and I'm actually surprised I picked it up afterwards because yeah, I lost a whole week of little images because we did nothing but sleep and rest and try to get better. That is what the 610 represents at pretty much the start of the whole project. 610 was our hotel room number, and it's in the shade of green that the hotel room was painted in. That was the only time that I didn't want to stitch something, and that was just because I was way too sick to do so. Question 9. Matadoro Berta asked, did you feel overwhelmed by this project at some point? That is a great question, and the honest answer is no. I personally am someone that needs to have a project going, and obviously in Japan I didn't have my sewing machine, so I wasn't sewing anything, and this cross-stitch project kind of filled that void for me. It was the perfect project for traveling as well because it didn't take up that much time or space. It was super light to carry around as well. I ended up bringing a knitting project with me as well while I was in Japan, and that stupid knitting project weighed like over a kilo, and I barely touched it because I was so involved in my cross stitch that it took up all of my spare time. Also, part of the reason I think why it never became overwhelming to me is I didn't have any fixed rules about it. I, from the start, told myself that if I got sick of it at any point, I would just stop working on it and forget all about it. But that never happened. I genuinely enjoyed working on this project the whole entire trip. And now that I'm back, I'm so glad I kept it up because it honestly is the best keepsake of our trip. Like pretty much every single morning we just stare at it and it brings up so many memories. Like you can look through photos obviously, but photos always begin to blur into multiple days and you can't pinpoint exactly what you did on each given day. But because we've like put so much thought into what picture could represent the day, it just makes them so much more like, I can't even explain it. It just makes it so you're able to remember each exact day. Yeah, it's really an incredible project. I totally recommend if you're thinking of doing something similar. It's So Dusty asked, do you have any regrets or things you would do differently? The only thing I can think of is I wish I had have put like some guidelines along the side, just because my images started to go slightly crooked because I just was doing it all by sight. It does bother me slightly just because I like things to look as perfect as possible, but ultimately it's not the biggest deal and I'm sure no one else would notice it. It's just something that I can't help but see every time I look at it. And the last question is from Zach and Lou, and they ask, which is your favorite? Honestly, the answer to this changes every single day. There's so many different images that it's hard to pick just one favorite. I think I do have a few that I'm exceptionally proud of though. One of my favorites that I designed is the koi fish. I am so proud of how that turned out. It just looks exactly like a koi fish. I also really love the swan boat. Matt and I actually collaborated on this one and designed it together, and it's one of my favorites. It just is such a cute little micro cross stitch. I also have to say I love the tie-dyed rainbow shirt. I again was just so happy with how this one turned out. Like the colors just all melded into one another exactly like tie-dye, and I just feel like it represented the shirt so well. I may as well start explaining what some of the images represent, and I'll start with the tie-dye shirt. Basically, we were in a bar and this guy was playing acoustic music in the bar. It was incredible. He was so entertaining to watch and he was wearing the most incredible tie-dye shirt. Like, I was in love with it. And afterwards he came up and talked to us for a bit, which was so nice. He spoke really good English basically and came up and talked to us for a bit, and I was like, I'm obsessed with your shirt. And he's like, thank you. I just picked it up at a vintage shop literally 2 minutes before my set and I'm in love with it. It's so cool. I'm like, literally it's amazing. Yeah, basically he was just a lovely guy and made our day coming and talking to us for a bit, and he had the coolest shirt. What else should I go through? What I'm gonna do, I'm going to move to the side and I'll have an image of the cross stitch sitting here, so you can hopefully see the images as I talk about them. We may as well start with the first one I did, which is this cute little yellow canister here. Basically, the first day we arrived in Japan after 3 years of not being able to travel there. It was an incredible day and there were 100 different things I could have chosen to cross stitch that day. But I ended up going with this little canister because we went to one of my favorite stores in Tokyo called Tokyo Hands. Basically, it's just like a giant department craft store. It's heaven on earth, honestly. Every time we go to Japan, we spend hours in the shop, and this time was no exception. And one of my favorite things I found during this visit was a whole bunch of miniatures. And my favorite was this vintage miniature canister set, which I just fell so in love with. It was the cutest thing ever. I didn't end up buying it this time, but I made the cross stitch that because it just represented the excited feeling of being back in Japan and all the cute things that I was going to discover during this 6-month trip. And yeah, I did end up buying the canisters a few months later when I visited the store again. Then we also have like the positive COVID test, which was such a bummer. And next to that, I've got this little pill, which is honestly probably my favorite story of the whole 6 months. Basically, what happened was Matt was feeling sick. He had COVID. We didn't know that yet though. We were in the hotel. He couldn't even get out of bed. He was so sick. I wasn't sick yet, so I went to find pain medicine because he'd already consumed the whole packet of Panadol I had taken with me. It wasn't a whole packet, it was probably like 1 sheet of Panadol I brought over with us just in case we got a headache on the flight. And then I thought we'd just buy more once we get there. And boy, did we need some quickly because Matt was in a whole heap of pains, terrible sore throat, terrible headache, we had every symptom. So to start with, I went to the convenience store on the corner from our hotel and I just asked them, do you have medicines and things like that? And he was like, no we don't, but chotomate kudasai, which means just wait 1 minute. And I was like, okay. And he went out the back and I was like, maybe he's going to go get me some pain relief medicine that he brought himself, which is a bit sketch. But in the end, he had come back from the back of the store, had completely changed out of his uniform and was like, follow me, and proceeded to take me multiple blocks away from this convenience store to a drugstore, and then brought me inside the drugstore, showed me exactly what I needed because I explained to him what symptoms Matt had. And then, if that wasn't enough, he then paid for the medicine for me, which I tried to stop, but in Japan, they are so honorific. They were like, no, I will buy this for you, it's fine. And I was like, oh man, I feel so guilty. I brought you away from your work. Now you're buying me these tablets. Like, it was magical and stress inducing all at once. But anyway, we proceeded to leave the store. I was obviously just so thankful and trying to convey my thanks to him as best I could in broken Japanese. And then he was like, have a great day, nice to meet you. And then he was gone. And I was lost because I had no idea where my hotel was. Luckily, I had Google Maps and internet that worked, so I found it with no problems. But like, how incredible is that story? Like, that is just the people of Japan. They're so friendly, but not only friendly, helpful as well. And the fact he bought the Panadol for me was just, like I said earlier, we felt so alone when we got COVID, but a little moment like that made me feel like we could get through it. We're never alone because someone is willing to help if you need it. So yeah, definitely my favorite story of the whole trip, and what a lovely guy. He was a legend. Here we have a little can with a peach on it, and that's to represent my delicious peach alcoholic drink. It is divine. If you're in Japan, you have to try it. And I have it pictured on a little picnic blanket with little cherry blossoms all around it because that was our first experience of Hanami, which basically means flower watching or cherry blossom watching, which is like a whole big deal in Japan. Like, everyone has a little bento picnic and watches the most beautiful display of cherry blossoms as they start to bloom. And it was my first time experiencing cherry blossom season, so it was just such a magical time. We have a spilt green tea, and this was a day we went to Kura Sushi, which is just really cheap sushi but so good, so fun. And Matt somehow managed to spill his green tea everywhere, which was, for me, really funny. I couldn't stop laughing, but for him was super stressful, and I don't think he appreciated me laughing at him that much. Oh, we've got a Macca's bag. That isn't one of my designs. I actually found a pixel art of a Macca's bag on Pinterest, and so kind of used that as inspiration. That day I had very severe period pain, and so I was in bed all day, and Matt came home from his day of adventuring with some Japanese McDonald's. I have to say, Japanese Macca's is not good. But compared to Australian McDonald's, it was terrible. Like, literally tasted like cardboard. The little yellow guy here is called Patekumon, and it's the mascot of one of the towns we visited on a day trip. He's basically a miso potato, which I thought was the cutest thing ever. We've also got the bike and the dome tent next to it, and that represents our amazing Shimanami Kaido adventure. Basically, we went on this super long bike ride along multiple different bridges that connect multiple small islands together, and it was one of the top 3 experiences of our whole entire 6 months. It was such a cool experience. And then we stayed in a cute little dome tent at the halfway point, which was incredible. It was definitely glamping. We had like dinner cooked for us and everything on a Japanese barbecue. It was incredible. We have the fabric rolls there. That represents my incredible day of fabric shopping at Napori Fabric Town. We've got the box there with a little cat on it because we had to ship a whole heap of our purchases back home. And there's a courier company in Japan that has the logo of a little mama cat holding a baby cat, and it's the cutest thing ever, and it was on the box and I just thought it was so cute. Also, shipping the box was a bit of an ordeal because Japan does shipping a bit different to Australia, so it just took a bit of getting used to, and once we did it once, we're fine, but yeah, that first time was a little bit stressful. Okay, next we have the beer shirt. Basically, the day we arrived in Hiroshima, we went to a little craft beer bar that was next to our hotel. I don't know if you've ever experienced this happening, but the waitress accidentally spilled a beer on the guy sitting next to us, and it was just like, oh, it's such a cringe thing because you feel so bad for the waitress, but you also feel so bad for the guy because he was saturated in beer and had to even leave and go buy a new shirt at the shop nearby. And It was just such an ordeal, and we could understand what the Japanese people were saying around us, and one of the older men there was like, it's because there are foreigners here, it's making everyone on edge. So we just felt cringe about that. And we were like, okay, I think it's time to go. Like, it was just, yeah, cringe on so many levels, but such an intense memory that I had to include it in the cross stitch project. I got so many people asking about what the beetle represented, and this one's funny. We had just gotten to Beppu, which is a famous like onsen hot spring town, and it was such a beautiful day. And I was just like, Matt, I'm having the best time. I love it here. This is such a gorgeous place. And I felt something on my skirt. I was wearing my favorite burnt orange skirt that I actually bought in Kyoto last time I was in Japan. And I just felt this crispy thing on my skirt, and I looked down and it is the biggest bug I have ever seen in my life. I live in Australia. I've never seen a bug like this. It was huge. It was black, it had spots on it, and I was screaming my tits off, like screaming at the top of my lungs, which in Japan is such a no-no. Matt's like, shush, shush. Like, everyone's so quiet all the time. I'm like, I can't help it, get it off, get it off. It was just, oh, such a terrifying moment, but like, so funny. I was laughing at the same time. Like, I was screaming and laughing, and it was just such a moment. And yeah, oh, did not like the bugs of Japan, that's for sure. Then we've got a cute little market stall because this represents our first day in Sapporo, which we actually lived in for a good 2.5 months. It was my favorite spot in Japan by far. And the first day we were there exploring, I ended up stumbling upon this summer festival with a whole heap of food stalls, and it was just the most magical thing. The sun was like shining through the tree. It was just magical. And so I stitched up a little street food stall to represent that incredible summer festival I found. Then I've got a Starbucks cup because that was the day I realized I like Starbucks. We don't have Starbucks here in Tasmania, so I never understood the hype. I was like, why would you go to Starbucks when you can go to a cute local cafe? And I still abide by that. Like, I would go to a local cafe over Starbucks any day. But there was a day where I just woke up and I was like, I feel like a Starbucks. Like, my order was just a matcha latte with oat milk, and it was divine. So good. So yeah, I woke up that day and I was like, Matt, I'm going to go for a walk to Starbucks. I'll see you later. And that's when I realized I had become a Starbucks girly. This yellow squiggle actually is the logo of one of our favorite cafes in Sapporo. It's called Pool, but with multiple O's, which is why I love the logo so much, because it's actually like, the squiggle spells pool. It was actually like a cool workspace area, so you could actually buy coffee and work from the cafe with a laptop. And they had PowerPoints and everything, so we would literally just buy a coffee every couple of hours and work there all day. And we became really good friends with the owners and the people that work there, and we got a photo with them before we left. And Matt actually messaged them on Instagram the other day, just being like, we miss you, legends. And they said they missed us too, which was probably just being nice because we were there so much. I've got this one here, which is probably my least successful cross stitch. It's actually of this tiny little ornament that I found on the side of the road one day. There was a basket full of them and it said, free, please take one. And I thought it was just a fun little moment. Sadly, yeah, the cross stitch didn't turn out exactly how I hoped. The colors are looking a little bit more washed out, but I'll put the design on the screen now so you can see what I was kind of going for. Then I've got my hammer with flowers all around it when I had a fun afternoon of hammer pounding flowers onto fabric. I bought the flowers from a local flower festival nearby and then decided to like press them into fabric, and yeah, it was just such a beautiful crafty afternoon. I had so much fun, and it was another cute little keepsake to take home with me. Then this little sign here actually is from another favorite cafe of ours called Small Things, and they actually have this little sign in their window and they put a little green token next to each day they'll be open for the entire month, which I just thought was such a cool way to communicate their opening days, because they're a small cafe, they're not open every single day. Then we've got this little hut here with a little beer sitting in it, and that represents the beer garden that was set up in Adori Park. It's an incredible beer garden that was like running for a whole month during the summer, and yeah, it was just amazing just walking through that park and just having so many people just out enjoying the sunshine and drinking local Sapporo beers as well as other Japanese beers, and there was a section for worldwide beers as well. Then we have a vending machine because it was hot that day and I was feeling really faint, so I was feeling very thankful for the many vending machines around the place that day. Then we had a bit of a typhoon, so that's what the wind symbol there represents. And then lastly, we have our little home here in Tasmania, which we returned to. That really is just the quickest snippet of the amount of different stories that are on this Cross Stitch a Day project. Hopefully you're not screaming at the screen wanting me to cover one of the images that I haven't covered in this video, because that would be really frustrating. Honestly, some are just really mundane. Like, I have shared the most exciting stories. It's been really fun to sit down and talk about it, talk through the whole process and about some of the stories behind some of the images. Hopefully this video has inspired you to have a go at a Cross Stitch a Day project of your own. Yeah, 100% recommend it. It was so fun. Such a creative process, having to design the images and then actually physically stitch them as well. Perfect as a travel diary like I did, but even if you just wanted to document a fun month of your life or even a whole year of your life, that could be really cool. I did end up buying some fabric over in Japan. It's just this plaid fabric, but it has this square section that is very similar to Aida cloth, so you could potentially do a little micro cross stitch in the fabric. And so I think if I was to do a cross stitch project again in the future, I would actually make a dress out of this fabric and then spend a year or so stitching little micro cross stitches all over it to represent each day of the year or something. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video until the very end if you're still here. I have literally been filming this video for like nearly 2 hours, I think, so I have no idea how long the finished video is going to be. I guess if you're still watching this video, then you enjoyed it, so thank you so much for that, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.